All right, this set of notes is on the Unit 1 key vocabulary. These are pretty much right out of the book. I've just sort of simplified them a little bit, so hopefully that'll help make it a little more clear. Our first terms come from Chapter 9, and the first is the Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise is the name that's actually given to a series of laws that were passed by Congress in 1820. What these compromise laws did was they admitted Missouri into the Union as a slave state, and they admitted Maine as a free state. And it also drew a line across the rest of the Louisiana Territory and said, above this line, slavery is going to be banned. So here's a picture, and you see the states that are in blue are actually the slave states. The states in green are the free states. And there was an equal number of them. And so Missouri comes in on the blue side, Maine goes in on the green side, and then they drew that red line and said, okay, anything above this line in that orange area, slavery will be banned. That was the Missouri Compromise. Our next term is the Compromise of 1850. And these were a series of laws passed by Congress, again as a compromise. They did a few things. They admitted California into the Union as a free state. It banned slavery in Washington, D.C., and it established a new, stronger fugitive slave law. In our next definition, we'll cover that in a little more detail. Again, pause this as you need to get the definitions down. All right, our next definition is fugitive slave law. So what is that? This was a law, you can eliminate that word first, just a law passed by Congress to allow the capture and return of slaves who had escaped into another state or territory. Right? That's what a fugitive is, a runaway. And in addition to allowing people to capture runaway slaves, it fined officials who would refuse to enforce the law and fined individuals who helped slaves escape. Uncle Tom's Cabin is our next definition, and you'll notice that is in italics. It's in italics for a reason. It's a book. Uncle Tom's Cabin was an 1852 novel written by a woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe. And this was a book that described the cruelties of slavery so clearly that it stirred up the conflict between people who supported slavery and those who opposed it. The Kansas-Nebraska Act. Another law, this one passed by Congress in 1854, to establish Kansas and Nebraska as territories who could decide for themselves whether or not to accept slavery. Chapter 10 definitions. First one is the Anaconda Plan. Chapter 10 covers the Civil War. So we have a couple definitions that we need to know related to the war. The Anaconda Plan was the nickname given to the Civil War strategy used by the North that was designed to squeeze the life out of the South by blockading southern ports and taking control of the Mississippi River. So sort of like an anaconda wraps up and squeezes its prey, this was how the North planned on winning the war. The Emancipation Proclamation, an order issued by Abraham Lincoln in 1863 to free slaves in the Confederate States. Sherman's March to the Sea, a devastating march led by Union General William Sherman that went through Georgia and destroyed everything along its path. A couple chapter 11 definitions, the 13th Amendment. We know an amendment is a change to the Constitution. This was a constitutional change ratified in 1865 that abolished slavery. Radical Republican. During and after the Civil War, a member of the Republican Party who believed in and fought for the emancipation of slaves and later the equal rights of African Americans. Radical Republican. Someone in the Republican Party who took this radical position. What back then was seen as radical. The Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, a secret white supremacist group, terrorist group, that resisted Reconstruction by tormenting African Americans. You guys have probably heard of the KKK before. Jim Crow laws. When you hear a Jim Crow or Jim Crow laws, what that's referring to are any of the laws that legalized racial segregation of blacks and whites in southern states. There should be an N on the end of southern. And our last term for Unit 1, Plessy versus Ferguson. Again, this is in italics for a reason. This is a Supreme Court case. And this is the Supreme Court case that established what was called the separate but equal doctrine. Okay, and it was very controversial. And this was the policy that allowed segregation to be legal as long as the facilities provided to blacks were equivalent to those provided to whites. So the Supreme Court actually came out and said, these laws that separate black people and white people, they're okay as long as the facilities are separate but equal. And as you can imagine, they often were separate but were very rarely equal.